I never wanted to live in a neighborhood with an HOA. My previous home was a charming craftsman on 3 acres where I could do whatever I pleased. But after my wife passed away 2 years ago, maintaining that property became too much. The Golden Palms community seemed perfect. Modern homes, proximity to my office at Heritage Financial, and amenities that would make retirement comfortable when that day eventually came. At the open house, I met Patricia Davenport, HOA president for 6 consecutive years. She gave me a crisp, professional smile and a firm handshake. "We maintain the highest standards here at Golden Palms," she said, handing me a 3-ring binder containing the community bylaws. "Everyone follows the rules, which is why our property values continue to climb." I skimmed the document that evening. Standard stuff. Approved paint colors, lawn maintenance requirements, holiday decoration policies. Nothing outrageous. The place seemed idyllic enough, and the proximity to my daughter and her family sealed the deal. After moving in, I spent my first month renovating the interior. My neighbors seemed friendly, particularly Raj and Sophia next door, who brought over a homemade lasagna. "Welcome to Golden Palms," Sophia said. "You'll love it here, just..." She glanced around nervously. "Make sure you stay on top of the HOA regulations." I didn't think much of her warning until the first letter arrived. The envelope bore the Golden Palms logo, an elegant palm tree silhouette in gold foil. Inside, a notice informed me that my garbage can had been visible from the street for approximately 3 hours after collection, violating Section 4.38 of the HOA bylaws. The letter requested immediate compliance and included a $50 fine. I was annoyed but paid it, chalking it up to a first-time mistake. However, at the next HOA meeting, I got my first real glimpse of Patricia in action. A young couple requested permission to install a small playground in their backyard for their twins. Patricia dismantled their proposal point by point, citing visibility concerns, potential noise, and aesthetic inconsistency. "We've worked hard to maintain Golden Palms' reputation," she said, looking down at them from her position at the center of the board table. "If we start making exceptions, where does it end?" The couple left, looking defeated. Afterward, I overheard Patricia speaking to another board member. "People buy here precisely because we enforce the rules," she said. "If they want chaos, they can move to the developments across town." As I walked home, I noticed how uniform everything was: identical mailboxes, precise landscaping, and Patricia's house at the end of the cul-de-sac, her Mercedes gleaming in the driveway. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of my HOA nightmare, and that Patricia would soon learn exactly who she was dealing with. The second letter from the HOA arrived 3 weeks later. This time, I was being fined $150 for unauthorized landscaping modifications. I'd planted 3 native wildflower species in a small garden bed near my porch, plants that required minimal water and maintenance. I called the number on the letterhead, requesting to speak with Patricia. Her assistant informed me that Patricia was extremely busy, but could fit me in for a 10-minute appointment the following Thursday. When I arrived at the HOA office, a converted home at the community entrance, Patricia kept me waiting for 30 minutes before ushering me into her meticulously organized office. "Mr. Reynolds," she said without looking up from my violation notice, "all exterior modifications must be pre-approved by the Landscape Committee. It's clearly stated in Section 7. These are drought-resistant native plants," I explained. "They're better for the environment than the water-hungry non-natives your guidelines suggest." Patricia's smile tightened. "The committee selects approved plants based on aesthetic cohesion, Mr. Reynolds, not your personal environmental concerns. The fine stands, and you'll need to replace the unauthorized plantings within 7 days." "That seems excessive for a few flowers," I countered. Her eyes narrowed. "Perhaps Golden Palms isn't the right fit for you if our standards seem excessive." She checked her watch. "I have another appointment now. You can appeal to the full board at next month's meeting if you wish, though I should mention the board hasn't overturned a landscaping violation in 4 years. As I turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and your mailbox appears to be 2 shades darker than our approved desert sand. The previous owner must have repainted it incorrectly. You'll want to address that before our next inspection." I paid the fine but decided to attend the next board meeting to better understand how this organization operated. What I witnessed was disturbing. Patricia ran the meeting like a dictator, dismissing legitimate concerns and steamrolling over any opposition. When elderly Mr. Fujimoto requested a deadline extension for repainting his shutters due to his recent hip surgery, Patricia denied it without discussion. "Rules are rules, Mr. Fujimoto. Perhaps you should have planned your surgery around our maintenance schedule," she said to uncomfortable murmurs from the audience. After the meeting, I introduced myself to several board members. I learned that 3 of the 5, including the treasurer, Marcus Williams, were Patricia's close friends who had moved into the community at her suggestion. The other 2 seemed cowed by her forceful personality. As weeks passed, I received more violation notices: for a garden hose visible from the sidewalk, for trash bins placed out 4 hours early when I had a morning flight, and for a non-conforming welcome mat. Each interaction with Patricia grew more tense, the condescension more pronounced. "Some people just can't adapt to community standards," she told me during our last encounter, looking down at me as though I were a disobedient child rather than a 58-year-old financial executive. What she didn't know was that in my position at Heritage Financial, I specialized in mortgage-backed securities and property loan portfolios, knowledge that would soon become very relevant to our ongoing conflict. By my 3rd month in Golden Palms, I'd accumulated $475 in HOA fines and developed a reputation as a problem resident. The final straw came when I received an overnight delivery package at 7:30 p.m. A set of financial documents that needed my urgent review. The delivery driver rang my doorbell, violating the HOA's no deliveries after 6:00 p.m. rule. The next morning, Patricia herself appeared at my door with a violation notice and a $200 fine. When I protested that I couldn't control when deliveries arrived, she cut me off. "Perhaps you should better coordinate your business affairs, Mr. Reynolds. Many successful professionals live in Golden Palms without disrupting the community." Her eyes swept over my casual weekend attire with clear disapproval. "Or perhaps your workplace doesn't have the same commitment to excellence that we maintain here." That comment ignited something in me. At Heritage Financial, I managed a portfolio worth billions. I decided it was time to do some research on Patricia Davenport and the Golden Palms HOA. My colleague Marcus in forensic accounting owed me a favor. Within days, he delivered a comprehensive financial analysis of the HOA's books for the past 5 years, obtained through public records and his network of contacts. What we discovered was illuminating. The HOA's reserve fund, money set aside for major repairs and improvements, was significantly underfunded compared to similar communities. Meanwhile, the administrative expenses had tripled during Patricia's tenure. The landscaping contract had been awarded to a company owned by the brother-in-law of Marcus Williams, the HOA treasurer, at rates 40% above market value. More interesting was Patricia's personal financial situation. She owned her Golden Palms home, plus 3 rental properties in neighboring communities and a vacation condo in Scottsdale. Her husband's construction company had received several lucrative contracts for community improvements. The picture emerging was one of a small group using the HOA as their personal fiefdom. I shared my findings with Raj and Sophia, who introduced me to a group of residents who had been documenting Patricia's reign of terror. Helen Paxton, a retired attorney, had created a comprehensive file of questionable board decisions. David Chen, who worked in local government, had repeatedly requested financial audits only to be stonewalled. "We've tried everything," Helen explained during a secret meeting in her garage. "Patricia has the board in her pocket and enough supporters who benefit from her decisions. Anyone who pushes too hard suddenly finds themselves buried in violation notices. She's especially hard on anyone she sees as not fitting in, Sophia added quietly. The Riverers were driven out last year with daily fines until they sold at a loss. Patricia's friend bought the house the next day. As if on cue, that evening I received notice of an emergency board meeting. The agenda included a new rule prohibiting unauthorized gatherings of more than 3 non-family members in private residences without board approval, clearly targeted at our growing resistance movement. The next day, I was shocked to see a formal warning on my door claiming my car had been parked at an improper angle in my own driveway. The notice included photos taken from various angles with measurements, threatening wheel boots for future violations. But Patricia had made a critical error. In her eagerness to establish dominance, she had awakened not just my indignation but my professional curiosity. That evening, I made several calls to former colleagues in the mortgage industry. What I discovered made me smile for the first time in weeks. Patricia Davenport was about to learn a valuable lesson about the interconnected world of real estate financing, and I was uniquely positioned to deliver that education. The morning after receiving my improperly parked car violation, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. As Senior Vice President of Mortgage Securities at Heritage Financial, I had access to databases most people couldn't imagine. With the information already gathered on Patricia and her cronies, I began tracing the financial web behind their real estate holdings. Patricia's home at Golden Palms was mortgaged through Meridian Bank, which wasn't surprising. What was interesting, however, was that all 4 of her properties, her primary residence, the 3 rental properties, and the Scottsdale condo, carried loans that had been bundled into mortgage-backed securities. And in a twist of fate that nearly made me laugh out loud, Heritage Financial had acquired that particular bundle 6 months ago. In essence, I represented the company that effectively controlled the loans on every piece of real estate Patricia owned. Before I could fully process this information, my assistant interrupted with news. The HOA had just imposed a special assessment of $2,000 per household for critical infrastructure improvements. The notice cited maintenance needs that couldn't be covered by the regular HOA fees due to unexpected cost increases. The assessment was due within 30 days, with a 10% late fee. I immediately called Helen Paxton, who confirmed that no details had been provided about these supposed improvements. Patricia just bulldozed it through at an emergency board meeting last night. Only board members were allowed to attend. That evening, another violation notice awaited me, this time claiming that the tree in my backyard exceeded the maximum height by 8 inches and needed to be trimmed within 48 hours, or I'd face a $500 fine. The notice was signed personally by Patricia with a handwritten note. Continued violations may result in a line against your property. Perhaps Golden Palms standards are beyond your capabilities. Something snapped inside me. I'd been dealing with high-stakes financial negotiations for decades, facing down billionaires and corporate raiders, yet this small-time dictator thought she could intimidate me. The next violation I found was even more absurd. Apparently, the brass house numbers on my porch were non-conforming, because they were brushed nickel finish rather than polished brass. I called my daughter that night, my voice tight with anger. "This has gone beyond ridiculous," I told her. "I'm seriously considering selling and moving." "Dad, that's exactly what they want," she said. "You've told me yourself, never make financial decisions from a position of emotion." She was right, of course. Throughout my career, I'd advised clients to stay calm and strategic when under pressure. Now I needed to follow my own advice. The breaking point came the next morning, when I found Patricia and Marcus Williams standing in my front yard with measuring tape and a camera, documenting new alleged violations. When I confronted them, Patricia smiled coldly. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. We're conducting a comprehensive compliance review of your property." The board has concerns about your commitment to community standards. You need permission to be on my property, I said firmly. Actually, Section 12.4 of the bylaws grants the HOA right of access for inspection purposes. Marcus replied smugly. You might want to familiarize yourself with the rules you agreed to follow. We've had to dedicate significant resources to monitoring your numerous violations, Patricia added. In fact, we're considering implementing a problem resident surcharge to cover these expenses. As they walked away, I overheard Patricia say, I give him 2 months before he lists the house. My client from Scottsdale would love this location. That was it. I'd been playing defense, but it was time to change tactics. I made 3 phone calls, one to my attorney, one to a private investigator specializing in financial fraud, and one to my firm's loan restructuring department. That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by financial documents, HOA bylaws, and property records. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to dismantle Patricia's little empire brick by brick. And thanks to her arrogance, I now had the perfect leverage point. I controlled the financial foundation of everything she owned. The next morning, I contacted Jason Merrick, Heritage Financial's head of mortgage securities, and an old friend. I need to restructure some loans in one of our portfolios, I explained, outlining the situation without naming names. Is there anything preventing us from conducting a comprehensive review of these properties? Not at all, Jason replied. In fact, with signs of impropriety in a homeowners association, we'd be remiss not to investigate potential impact on our collateral assets. By lunchtime, Patricia Davenport's properties were flagged for enhanced review, a legitimate but rarely used process that would put every aspect of her mortgages under a microscope. Meanwhile, I contacted several residents who had been forced out of Golden Palms through excessive fines and harassment. Many were eager to provide statements once they understood the purpose. Helen Paxton, with her legal background, helped compile a dossier on every questionable HOA decision over the past 5 years. Raj, who worked in it, recovered deleted posts from the community forum where residents had complained about selective enforcement before their comments mysteriously disappeared. I also hired a forensic accountant to analyze the HOA's financial records. The special assessment funds had been earmarked for a community enhancement project that, coincidentally, would be managed by Patricia's husband's construction company at a 60% markup over competitor bids. While this investigation proceeded, I continued to receive violation notices, now almost daily. My grass was inconsistently cut, it wasn't. My window trim needed immediate repainting. It had been painted 6 weeks ago. Even the angle of my garden hose nozzle was apparently in violation. Rather than fighting each ridiculous claim, I simply documented everything and paid the fines. Knowing each payment was building my case for harassment. I also began attending every HOA meeting, silently taking notes while recording everything on my phone. Legal in our state with one-party consent. At one particularly contentious meeting, elderly Mrs. Kinsella tearfully objected to her fine for having a small bird feeder in her backyard. Birds have been my only companion since Harold passed, she explained. Patricia was unmoved. Rules exist for a reason, Mrs. Kinsella. Your emotional attachment to wildlife doesn't supersede our community standards. I broke my silence. Perhaps we should put the bird feeder rule to a community vote. The bylaws do allow for regulation amendments with sufficient resident support. Patricia's eyes locked on mine. The board determines which issues require community input, Mr. Reynolds. Your persistent challenging of our authority is becoming disruptive. I'm simply suggesting we follow the processes outlined in our own bylaws, I responded mildly. After the meeting, several residents approached me discreetly, offering support and sharing their own stories of Patricia's tyranny. Our coalition was growing. The following week, I received an urgent call from my private investigator. He'd uncovered something significant. Marcus Williams, the HOA treasurer, had a previous record for financial improprieties at another homeowners association, a fact he concealed when running for the board. More importantly, the investigator had found evidence suggesting that some of the fines collected weren't being properly recorded in the HOA's accounts. That same day, Heritage Financial's review of Patricia's properties revealed several discrepancies. She had claimed primary residence status on tax forms for both her Golden Palms home and her Scottsdale condo, a clear case of tax fraud. Additionally, the rental properties showed signs of code violations that should have been addressed under the terms of her mortgages. I now had ammunition from multiple fronts, but I needed to time my response carefully. The annual HOA board election was approaching, and Patricia was seeking her 7th consecutive term as president. The community newsletter featured her campaign statement, "Continued excellence through consistent enforcement," accompanied by a photo of her standing proudly in front of her immaculate home. It was time to show Patricia Davenport that she'd picked the wrong person to bully. The loans behind her real estate empire were about to become very, very problematic. 3 weeks before the HOA election, Patricia escalated her campaign against me. A certified letter arrived stating that the board had voted to implement a $100 per day fine for my continued non-compliance with community standards. The letter cited 15 separate violations, including excessive opening and closing of garage door and improper mailbox flag positioning. That same afternoon, a notice was posted on the community bulletin board announcing a special meeting to discuss problem resident protocols, clearly aimed at me. Patricia was pulling out all stops to make an example of me before the election. What she didn't know was that I had been methodically setting up the dominoes to knock down her empire. I began by forwarding the forensic accounting report to the State Attorney General's office, highlighting potential embezzlement by the HOA treasurer. Next, I submitted a comprehensive report to the Property Tax Authority regarding Patricia's fraudulent dual primary residence claims. Then came the masterstroke. I arranged a meeting with Heritage Financial's mortgage compliance team, presenting evidence that Patricia's properties likely violated several terms of her loan agreements. Within days, all 4 of her properties were scheduled for formal inspection under the mortgage covenants. 2 days before the special problem resident meeting, Patricia received simultaneous notices: a tax audit request, a mortgage compliance inspection requirement, and a state investigation into the HOA's financial practices. The timing was no coincidence. That evening, my doorbell rang. Patricia stood there, her normally perfect appearance showing signs of strain. Gone was the condescending smile, replaced by thinly veiled panic. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied calmly. "Don't play innocent. These investigations, the mortgage reviews, they all started right after you moved in. What kind of game are you playing?" I studied her for a moment. "No game, Patricia. Just the natural consequences of actions. Financial improprieties tend to come to light eventually." Her facade cracked. "You don't understand. If these loans get called in, I'll lose everything. The market is down. I'm leveraged across all my properties." "That sounds like a precarious position," I observed. "Perhaps not the best time to be making enemies." "Are you threatening me?" she hissed. "Not at all. Just making an observation about financial prudence, something I've built my career on." The next day, the special meeting was mysteriously cancelled. Marcus Williams suddenly resigned as treasurer, citing personal reasons. 2 other board members began distancing themselves from Patricia, claiming they had been misled about certain decisions. Word spread quickly through Golden Palms. Residents who had been silently suffering under Patricia's regime began speaking out. The landscape company owned by the treasurer's brother-in-law announced it would not be renewing its contract. The construction company owned by Patricia's husband withdrew its bid for the special assessment project. At the next regular HOA meeting, attendance was unprecedented. Patricia appeared visibly stressed as she called the meeting to order, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. When she reached the agenda item about violation enforcement, she stumbled over her words. In light of community feedback, the board has decided to re-evaluate certain enforcement protocols. A resident stood up. Does this mean you'll be refunding the excessive fines many of us have paid under protest? Another joined in. And what about the special assessment? We deserve transparency about where that money is going. The meeting devolved into chaos as years of pent-up frustration poured out. Patricia tried desperately to maintain control, but her support had evaporated. When she attempted to adjourn without addressing the mounting questions, Helen Paxton stood up. According to Bylaw 8.32, any unresolved agenda items must be addressed before adjournment if more than 50% of attending members vote to continue, the retired attorney cited perfectly. I move that we continue this meeting until all financial questions have been answered. The vote was overwhelming. Patricia looked around the room, her gaze eventually landing on me sitting quietly in the back. For the first time, I saw recognition in her eyes, not of me as a troublesome resident, but of who I really was, the person who controlled the financial foundation of her entire life. She knew then that her reign was ending. The only question was how much damage she would sustain in the fall. The day of the HOA election arrived with tension hanging over Golden Palms like a thundercloud. In an unprecedented move, 5 candidates had emerged to challenge Patricia for the presidency, including Helen Paxton and Raj. Patricia had been unusually quiet in the days leading up to the election. The inspection of her rental properties had revealed multiple code violations requiring expensive repairs. The tax authority had opened a formal investigation into her dual primary residence claims. Most devastatingly, Heritage Financial had issued a notice that her mortgages were under review for potential covenant violations, a precursor to calling in the loans. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity, with residents standing along the walls. Patricia arrived looking haggard, the polished veneer gone. Marcus Williams was notably absent, having fled town ahead of the state investigation into the HOA's finances. As the meeting began, Patricia attempted to follow the usual protocol, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. When she tried to rush through the financial report, residents interrupted with pointed questions about the special assessment funds and the incomplete accounting of collected fines. We'll address those concerns after the election, Patricia insisted, her voice strained. No, came a chorus of voices. We need answers now. I had remained deliberately quiet throughout the meeting, but now I stood. I believe we should follow proper procedure. The bylaws clearly state that before any election, the current board must provide a full financial accounting to the membership. Patricia's eyes locked with mine, hatred and fear battling for dominance. Fine, she snapped. Our treasurer is unavailable, but I can provide a summary of our accounts. Her summary was vague and clearly incomplete. When pressed for details about the Special Assessment Fund, she claimed the records were being organized and unavailable. Helen Paxton stood next. I have here the results of a forensic audit conducted by an independent accounting firm, she announced, distributing copies of the report. It shows concerning discrepancies between reported fines and actual deposits. The room erupted as residents reviewed the damning evidence. Years of financial mismanagement, possibly outright theft, lay bare for all to see. This is slander, Patricia shouted over the din. These so-called discrepancies are simply timing differences in accounting periods. The audit covers 5 consecutive years, Helen replied calmly. The pattern is consistent and clear. David Chen, who worked in local government, stood next. I forwarded this report to the district attorney's office. They've opened an investigation. Patricia's face drained of color. You can't do that without board approval. Actually, I interjected, any member can report suspected financial improprieties to the proper authorities. It's not only our right, but our responsibility. As the reality of her situation sank in, Patricia made a desperate play. These attacks are coordinated by dissidents who don't appreciate the value of our strict standards. Without proper enforcement, Golden Palms will deteriorate like every other community. An elderly resident I'd never seen speak at meetings slowly rose to his feet. "I've lived here since before you arrived, Patricia. Golden Palms was a lovely community where neighbors helped each other. You turned it into a place of fear and suspicion." The election proceeded despite Patricia's attempts to delay. The results were overwhelming. Helen Paxton was elected president with 87% of the vote. The entire board was replaced with new members committed to transparency and reasonable enforcement. As the meeting concluded, Patricia pushed through the crowd toward the exit, her head held high despite her defeat. I followed her outside. "Patricia," I called softly. She turned, her expression hard. "Enjoying your victory, Mr. Reynolds." "This isn't about winning or losing," I said. "It's about accountability." "You have no idea what you've done," she hissed. "I built this community. I protected our property values. At the expense of creating a community people actually want to live in," I replied. "But that's not why I wanted to speak with you." I handed her my business card, my actual card from Heritage Financial that I hadn't previously shared. Her eyes widened as she read my title, Senior Vice President, Mortgage Securities Division. "You," she began, realization dawning. "Yes," I confirmed. "I represent the company that holds the loans on all your properties. The same properties now under review for compliance violations." Her hand trembled as she clutched my card. "This was your plan all along." "No, Patricia. You set these events in motion with your actions. I simply stopped playing defense." Her mask finally cracked completely. "Please," she whispered. "Those properties are all I have. My husband's business is failing because of the construction contract withdrawal. I can't lose my homes too." For the first time, I saw the human behind the tyrant, frightened, overextended, and now facing the consequences of years of manipulation and bullying. "The compliance review will proceed," I said firmly. "But its outcome will depend largely on how you handle the next few weeks. A cooperative, transparent approach regarding the HOA's finances would be viewed favorably. Continued obstruction would not." I left her standing there in the parking lot, the card still clutched in her hand, as the gravity of her situation fully settled upon her. The woman who had wielded the HOA rulebook like a weapon now found herself at the mercy of financial covenants far more powerful than her community bylaws. Covenants that I effectively controlled. 6 months after the dramatic HOA election, Golden Palms had transformed. Under Helen Paxton's leadership, the board had implemented a complete overhaul of the community governance. The bylaws were revised to require resident approval for major decisions, financial reports were published monthly, and a professional management company, vetted by a resident committee, now handled day-to-day operations. The special assessment had been cancelled, and residents received refunds for provably excessive fines. The community spaces bloomed with new life as reasonable landscaping rules allowed for more diverse gardens. Children's laughter could be heard from backyard play sets that would have been forbidden under the old regime. As for Patricia Davenport, her fall had been swift, but not as catastrophic as it might have been. After the state investigation confirmed financial improprieties, she had cooperated fully, providing evidence that implicated Marcus Williams in the embezzlement of HOA funds. In exchange for her testimony, she received immunity from prosecution. The tax authorities had been less forgiving. Her dual primary residence claims resulted in significant penalties and back taxes. To satisfy these obligations, she had been forced to sell her vacation condo and one rental property. Heritage Financial's compliance review had found numerous violations in her remaining properties. However, rather than immediately calling in the loans, we had offered a restructuring option. Patricia could retain ownership if she brought the properties up to code and refinanced under stricter terms. It was a harsh but fair solution that protected both our investment and her financial survival. One sunny Saturday morning, as I tended to my front garden, now flourishing with native plants that would have earned multiple violations under the old rules, a familiar Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Patricia stepped out, looking different than I remembered. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were gone, replaced by casual attire and a more natural appearance. "Mr. Reynolds," she greeted me, her tone respectful, but not subservient. "Do you have a moment?" I gestured to the porch chairs, and we sat facing each other. For a moment, she simply looked around at the neighborhood, taking in the changes. "It looks different," she finally said. "Better, I think," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I wanted to tell you that I've completed the required repairs on my properties. The compliance officer signed off yesterday." "I'm glad to hear it." She studied me for a moment. "You could have destroyed me completely. Many people would have, after what I put them through." "Destruction wasn't the goal," I said. "Accountability was." Patricia looked down at her hands. "I've been meeting with a therapist. She says I developed an unhealthy relationship with control after my first husband left me with nothing. The HOA became my way of ensuring stability. Understanding why we make poor choices is the first step toward making better ones," I offered. "I sold my house here," she continued. "I'm moving to Arizona to be near my sister. Fresh start. I think that's wise." She hesitated, then added, "The new owners seem nice. Young couple with a baby on the way." I told them about the recent changes to the HOA, that they won't have to worry about getting fined for a stroller on the porch. I smiled at that small sign of growth. Everyone deserves a community that feels like home, not a battleground. As Patricia prepared to leave, she paused. "One question has bothered me for months. When did you realize you held my mortgages? Was it before you moved in?" I shook my head. "Pure coincidence. I discovered it only after you pushed me to investigate." She laughed for the first time since I'd known her, a genuine sound of recognition. "I created my own worst enemy." "Not an enemy," I corrected. "Just someone who refused to be bullied." After Patricia drove away, my neighbor Sophia came over with a pitcher of lemonade. "Was that who I think it was?" she asked incredulously. I nodded. People can change when they have to. That evening, Golden Palms held its first community picnic in the park that had previously been used only for HOA-approved functions. Families mingled, children played, and neighbors connected without fear of violation notices. Heather Paxton gave a brief speech about the community's new direction, emphasizing collaboration over control. "This is what a neighborhood should be," Raj said, as we watched residents chatting and laughing together. "Not just houses next to each other, but people who care." As the sun set over Golden Palms, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. Patricia's reign of HOA tyranny had ended not through equal tyranny, but through the strategic application of leverage and accountability. The system that she had used to control others had ultimately been her undoing when confronted by someone who understood the rules of a much bigger game. I raised my glass in a silent toast to second chances and new beginnings. Property values in Golden Palms remained strong, but now for the right reasons, because it had become a place where people genuinely wanted to live, not a community ruled by fear. And that, I thought as children's laughter echoed across the park, was the most valuable asset of all. The end.